Good morning.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
I was wondering if you're going to be here today. Good morning. I'd like to call the City Council order with a special council meeting today for Friday, August the 10th, 2018. Ask Ms. Huerta if she'll call the roll.
Mayor Joe McComb.
Here.
Council members Rudy Garza.
Here.
Paulette Guajardo.
Present.
Michael Hunter, not here yet. Debbie Lindsay Opal.
Here.
Ben Molina.
Present.
Everett Roy.
Present.
Lucy Rubio is absent. Greg Smith.
Here.
Interim City Manager Keith Selman.
Present.
City Attorney Miles Risley.
Here.
Mayor and Council, a quorum of the Council and the required charter officers are present to conduct the meeting.
Okay. It's agenda item for Tuesday. All right, well, the purpose of the meeting today is to consider calling a special election for bond 2018. Turn it over to Interim City Manager Keith Selman to make the presentation. And as I understand it, this is a first reading of an ordinance. I guess there'll have to be a vote in order to move it forward, or is this more?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Mayor.
There will be some action at the end of the discussion.
Correct.
Yes,
That's
ma'am.
right.
All right. And I think as part of our presentation, and in the interest of time, I know we'll have some questions, and I'm talking to myself primarily, I think like we've done on a couple other things, is before we start asking questions, if we'll jot down ourselves a note, if something triggers something we want to ask about, jot it down. Let's have the whole presentation, because a statement may be made early that will raise a question and the answer may come later. So that we'll have the full presentation and then we'll turn it over for questions if we could do that.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay.
We have a presentation prepared for you. It's a presentation that will not be unfamiliar to the council. We've passed out two documents, so that one is the proposed bond program information guide, and also a quick run at the bond summary. Two different handouts for you to peruse during the presentation. And if Val will kick us off with the presentation. Again, this is the ordinance ordering a special election to be held on November 6th.
Good morning. Valerie Gray, Executive Director of Public Works. As the city manager mentioned, you'll see that we've handed out the draft of the information guide. It's updated with a lot of the information I'm going to give to you right now. The bond summary was also at a request of the council that hopefully we could have some short summary so they can understand what the overall program is. But this will be an overview of the proposed 2008 bond program with the requested council changes that will be presented for consideration by the voters during the elections this coming November. The proposed bond 2018 program totals $96 million. It now has 6 propositions. The public facilities proposition was deleted as instructed, and the $1.3 million that was removed for that prop was added to Park and Rec proposition C, increasing the project total for Park and Rec now from by 1 to 7. And now the budget moved from 4.3 to 5.6 million. Propositions A and B make up most of the program total at 74 million and are mostly arterial and collector streets and other traffic-related improvements. And as instructed by council, a project for residential street rebuild has been added for $10.5 million in place of the 3 projects that we had designated to be 100% designed. Those projects were Everhart, Holly, and Slough. They were removed, and the remaining 4 propositions C through F make up the remaining 22 million that are comprised of various capital improvements. And what you see on here, we tried to do it in red so that you can follow the changes we made. Proposition A is now made up of 23 improvement projects shown here, which total 52 million. The red shows most of the recent requested changes. Most of the projects are arterials and/or collector improvements and are representative segments from all 5 council districts. There is one residential street rebuild project for $10.5 million. You'll see it down, I think it's project number 18. That is also for locations that are citywide and will be based on need, and they're yet to be determined their locations. The last 5 projects are for other traffic-related improvement projects citywide. Proposition A at $52 million requires no property tax increase and does not include utility cost increase required for the associated utility improvements. If approved by the voters, residential customers will see an approximately $2 per month increase on their utility bill to support this proposition. Proposition B is made up of 14 improvement projects, which total $22 million. These projects are more arterial and collector street improvements and are also from representative segments in all 5 districts. Proposition B at $22 million requires a property tax increase of 1 cent and also does not include utility costs required for associated utility improvements. If Proposition B is approved by the voters, residential customers will see an approximately 82 cents per month increase on their utility bills. The remaining 4 propositions C through F is now made up of 19 improvement projects totaling $22 million. Proposition C is made up of 7 park and recreation related improvement projects totaling $5.6 million. As requested, a project for splash pads and shade structures has been added for the $1.3 million that was moved from the deleted facility proposition. The changes are shown in red. So we took it from the facilities prop and we moved it into Park and Rec, and it is now the splash pads and shades. Proposition D is made up of 4 libraries and cultural facility improvement projects, and they total $3.9 million. Now, what is propositions E and F? They do remain the same. Proposition E is made up of 7 public safety improvement projects. They total $11.3 million. Proposition F is made up of 1 public health improvement project totaling $1.1 million. If all 4 propositions C through F totaling $22 million are approved by the voters, they will also require a tax increase of 1 cent. But they do not require utility improvements or a utility cost increase. Today is the first reading of an ordinance for ordering the special election. The projects as presented to you here today are included in that ordinance. Those changes have been made in the ordinance, which was prepared by legal, the ballot language. Final approval is expected next Tuesday on the 14th, and Election Day being November 6th. And with that, I stand by for any questions that you may have.
Okay, any council members have any questions, comments? I think we've got the buttons working. That Mr. Molina, are you
here?
All right. Well, I want to make sure the right button's lit up for the right person.
Thank you, Mayor. What I want to do is revisit one of the proposals that we made last time. We moved money from the from the facilities, that 1.2, a little over 1.2 million, into Parks and Rec for splash pads and shade structures. But we have what is it called? The Community Enrichment Fund. Do I have the name correct?
Correct, you do.
Okay, which is monies that are specifically dedicated to improvements at parks. And so what I'd like to do, I know that we have some issues with a couple of our piers, Cole Park and Dimmitt Pier. And what I would like to do is move that money again out of the bond for, I'm sorry, not move it out of the bond, but redesignate that money, the 1.2 million, and instead of allocating that for splash pads and shade structures, dedicate that to the repair and or reconstruction of the 2 piers. And use the enrichment money, which is outside of the bond, for those park improvements.
I'll second that. If you need to.
Okay, there's
And
a
that is my motion. Thank you.
As I understand the motion, it's to leave the 1.2 million in the program, but would be used for this pier repairs on Dimmitt and Cole Park Pier, and that the Park Enrichment Fund would be used for the splash pad projects.
Yes.
All right,
Yes.
there's a motion and a second. Any discussion on that? Ms. Bohardo?
Oh, no, not on this.
All right, any discussion on the motion?
Oh, very nice.
Well, I would like to thank you, Mr. Molina, that we know that those piers, they're a popular point for this city, and the fact that they're now, after decades, out of line. I like to see that emphasis, and I particularly like your thoughts on the splash pads and the shade structures. If we go to enrichment fund, we can do it now. We don't wait till November to get going and things. So this need that the community is expressed on there, the funds are sitting there available. I think we've given directions to staff. Let's go ahead and get those done. So the folks out there, you're going to get splash pads, you're going to get shade structures, and we can do it now. And this way we can look at those long-term capital needs, which the piers are, these long-life assets. So I fully support and thank you for bringing that motion up.
Mr. Garza? Or is this?
I support the motion too, but I know that in some information I just got right to the meeting, you were talking about reconstruction could be as high as $8 million. And you talked about possibly looking to see if we might be able to use or put in for an application for restore pads. Even if this isn't enough money, 1.2, I think the original number was 1.9 is what we thought we had taken out of the facilities improvement or facilities need. If we increase that 1.2 to 1.9, and if we needed to have some matching, I don't know, do some of the restore projects require matching?
I believe some of them do.
So if we got this approved through a bond, then we'd actually,
the money for matching.
we'd have some money for matching. So I think that would be, even if it doesn't get us to where we need to get, I think that, I think what Councilman Smith said about us being able to do the splash pads out of the Community Enrichment Fund, I think is a good step in the right direction. But this 1.9, instead of 1.2, I think I'd like to see it 1.9, make sure we have enough money, which was the original number that we had set aside for public facilities.
We moved the exact amount from public facilities. It was 1.2.
1.2, okay.
Yes.
Then I stand corrected. I mean, I'm wrong. But anyway, if that's what it is, then yeah, I'd like to go, us to go set aside for see if we can get it approved so we can set aside for the piers if we get, also, I know that on the restore side, are we working on trying to get maybe some sort of debris baskets or something in the stormwater outfalls? I mean, is there any application for that? I know that was one of the areas where I thought should be able to qualify for.
That would almost be a separate presentation from
Yeah,
Tom in
okay.
terms of the projects that we've got quite a few projects we would be looking at for restore. The opportunity to submit those projects is not open to us just yet. They've just now got the criteria for project selection out for comment at the state level, and that won't be wrapped up till the end of this month. So.
Well, at some point when it's appropriate, I think we need to have that conversation.
Discussion
so
on the projects that we would look to make application for.
The last time we got a big goose egg, and I'd just like to make sure that we looked at projects that give us the best chance of being successful.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Garza, when we make that change, if it goes through, we'll have to include that. These will take care of those 2 piers, but we do and are aware that it's not going to be the total amount that's necessary. It'll have to be leveraged with some other funding. Because we don't, right, because of the estimates. Yes. Yes.
Ms. Opal?
I guess my only concern is what you just referenced, Ms. Gray. When we do these projects on a bond, for which we do not have sufficient funds to do the projects, it has been, shall we say, problematic from time to time. And I don't know how we craft this such that we don't create an expectation, even unintentional, that these funds would be sufficient to do this work. It's far short of that. We've had several projects. Some of them have been park projects, pool projects. Some of them have been bridge projects. And it becomes very problematic for councils at the time to either address why the funds aren't there. So what kind of mechanism would we have? What would happen to these funds if we were unable to accumulate the necessary matching funds or funds for completion? And that's really my biggest concern. This is the right move, but it is definitely of concern when we put something on a bond that we're going to be paying interest on for 20 years, that we don't quite have a clear expectation of where it would come from.
That's a good question. That's how they've done bonds in the past. One example is the aquatics, when they listed several pools and they didn't have enough funding. But it was working through the department. They were able to find the additional funding that was necessary to do both of those jobs. So in the case of this, we know that, I don't think we even have an estimate on the second pier, but we do have one that we know is over $1 million on one of the piers. So to do both of them.
I just want us to be really good wordsmiths in the discussion, in the presentation for what's going to be there, that there's not an expectation that this is for the piers. It's for right. matching funds. To,
and that's why I mentioned that, yes.
Excellent.
All right, no more comments on the motion. All right, you need record of vote since we're talking about a bond issue. Would that be better to be on?
Sure, that would be good, Mayor, for clarity. So this is for the motion to amend as stated by Mr. Molina, seconded by Councilmember Lindsay Opal. Mayor McComb?
Aye.
Councilmembers Garza?
Aye.
Guajardo?
Aye.
Hunter?
Aye.
Lindsay Opal?
Aye.
Molina?
Aye.
Roy?
Aye.
Rubio is absent. Smith?
Aye.
The motion passes.
All right, Ms. Guajardo?
Thank you. Well, in terms of revisiting, I wanted to look at Mrs. Gray, Proposition B.
Yes, ma'am.
Additional streets. That would be page 12 in our little booklet. Oh. Take one, pass it along. So we've got Junior Beck Drive. And this is a street that clearly you know the history of. And I'm wondering, this is reconstruction of the current street. That is an issue and a big one. We've seen it, you know, when it rains, it's really, really bad. But we also have probably equally the issue of that street not being connecting to Bear Lane. And I think that's been, you may want to inform, you know, us of some of that history. Everybody up here, and I'm welcome to give you a copy, has some original paperwork on, if you want this, it's original for Mr. Selman, no, for Mr. Selman. Mr. Selman. On when these conversations began, and I'm sure, I think Mr. Garza may have been kind of privy to some of this happening here in within the last few years, but Mrs. Rubio and I had met with some of these stakeholders some months ago, and clearly the intent is very strong for this road to be finished to Bear Lane. And I just feel that we should have a conversation in regards to that, because this is industrial. This is the original, what I shared with everybody is the original plan that goes back at least 20 years. But I don't know, and this is where you would come in, the details or, you know, of even considering looking into that in terms of extending a road versus the reconstruction.
Ms. Guajardo, I think I remember at the workshop we had discussed this is a section that's not constructed yet.
Right.
And on either side of that area is undeveloped property. And the process to which build that connecting street would be done at the time of the development of the adjacent properties. What we had told you at the time was to include this section of Junior Beck is one that would include an existing street or an existing right-of-way that the city is responsible for maintaining. And that's why this part was included, but to build a connector street would be done at the time the development would take place of the adjacent property owners.
And I guess the problem is that's not happening because there isn't a street. And it almost did back here, or back some years. And for whatever reasons, it did not take place. But I guess there's just, again, there's a very strong feel by the stakeholders that it's not a feel, it's a fact. People, the industry is not coming there because there is nothing there. So I didn't know how it almost got done and then didn't, so it was going to be then, and then now it's not okay to. Do you see what I'm saying?
I'm not sure when you mean it was going to be done before. I'm only speaking from when we had the workshop, as we explained that we chose this section and not that section, as far as including it on the program, because historically the fundings had been used to reconstruct those areas that the city are responsible for maintaining. And so in accordance to the life cycle, that's why we were including the section that's already constructed. Mm-hmm. I'm not quite sure that it was previously almost constructed. Is that what you said?
Oh, you were right. Okay. Well, Miss Debbie can do that.
That was a previous bond?
She can, but I'll just say this. You know, we can go back and forth, and I guess that's my point, and it's not to you directly or personally, but this is something that goes way, 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 way back, and I'm learning of the history. You clearly, know it. And I guess I say this to us up here. We can sit up here and say, well, no, the book says this, and nothing is happening. I mean, Mrs. Rubio and I were there, amongst some other people. She showed me the messages of people calling industry saying, I want to be there. And as soon as they know there's no road, they can't. I mean, they just can't. And then the road that is there is, hardly, you can't even get out if it rains, and which is why it's here, and I understand that. I'll go ahead and let Mrs. Debbie.
Ms. Guajardo, you have brought up such an excellent point, and really it demonstrates the power of councils. The Type A board actually had approved this project to move it forward that would connect Bear Lane to Old Brownsville. That does a lot more than just open up the door for the transportation, but because you have major commercial haulers. You've got, the Anheuser-Busch plant and some other things where at the Bluebell plant, and they have one way in and one way out. Even more interesting in this dynamic is that street was going to be completed at no cost to the taxpayers. Right. And the council at the time refused to take up the Type A recommendation, and it just went away. And it would have been such an excellent opportunity because we actually could have put that $1.5 million into a revolving fund so that some of the other streets that needed that would have been available to do that. But, councils have reasons for the decisions that they've made. I do think there's an opportunity, although it runs into some of the same challenges, that by adopting a Type B format, because with a Type A, it's really tied to job creation, and while there was going to be an expansion in jobs associated with it, it really created some challenges. But with Type B, we may be able to visit with the Type B board to see if maybe that might be an opportunity. I hear exactly what you're saying, and we are tasked with that. We've heard that's why this industrial park was set up when it was, is that there's no place for someone who wants to come in and support this industry that we have to quickly build a building and get going. And at one point, I think this was even for spec buildings, different things. That's why you see those kinds of folks there. So I agree with you that we need to look at how we solve this for a couple of reasons. It opens up a whole lot of development because it connects some of our major infrastructure, and it creates an opportunity to build more buildings. And so I don't know who Mr. Selman probably would be the person to visit with, to see if we could visit with the EDC, if we could begin to talk to Type B, to see if maybe that's another place that we would be able to look at building that street for the purpose of creating additional industrial support facilities in an area that is very accessible to both sides of the ship channel. And I think you've brought up an excellent point to be able to make that happen. So hopefully we can.
Mr. Garza?
Yeah, I was in the middle of all the conversations and discussions related to Junior Beck years ago. And again, I'm sorry that it actually died in council. It didn't even come out for a vote, but quite honestly, the biggest challenge, two things, is that the developer has to participate, or they have to actually build a road. If they build a subdivision, they build the road. If they want to have access, they need to do all the things that the city requires, the streets are drawn in, they build the roads at their cost. This particular project was a little different. It was an economic development project. It offered an opportunity for the landowner at that time. Mr. Ortiz has since passed away, but at that time, Mr. Ortiz wanted to extend the Junior Beck all the way to Old Brownsville Road, and he was going to do it basically on a loan from the Type A board at the time. Type A was going to provide the funds. He was going to build the road. He was going to come back and repave the old portion of Junior Beck from Bear Lane to where it ends right now. And to say, okay, well, we're really not in the speculative mode. We don't want to help the developer. It's something speculative. And so we said, no, you know what? This is something that we're not going to engage in, or we're going to let die. I didn't agree with that decision of the council. We didn't get a chance to debate it in open public. And the presentation that was made, quite frankly, by then the people on the EDC board was not the same presentation the Type A members heard, to be candid. The reason I thought it was a good project, even for Type A back then, I thought it was good because you have those big trucks, as you mentioned, turning in because of the industrial park, and the wear and tear, because they're able to have a throughput going straight out, from one end to the other, causes that terrible wear and tear. And even if we spend this 1.4 million right now, you still get the same dynamic that you got those trucks turning back around and causing that wear and tear on that roadway that's gonna keep it from, unless it goes concrete, it's gonna keep it from lasting a seriously long time. So the issue right now, since then, Mr. Ortiz has passed away. That was one of the things he wanted to do before he passed away. The family dynamics are probably different, and the market is certainly different. At that time, when that was coming up, we were in the middle of the heyday of the Eagle Ford Shale, and there's a lot of projects that have come in. They've gotten the zoning, they've got the desire to put in the streets, put in the subdivision, everything else, and all of a sudden, the market changes, it slows down, and they don't build the subdivision. In this particular case, someone might not want to build an industrial park if the timing is not right, if they don't feel the market's there. So again, I think it would be prudent to still, because of the fact that the road condition is there, it's still prudent for us to leave it, put it on the bond, see if we can get it approved by the taxpayer, because we do need to fix that road. But I still think it's prudent for us to go back and see if we can't resurrect it with the Type B board, and actually, tell them that there's some support for them coming through with the throughput. I don't know, again, if all the ingredients are there to be able to be successful and have what we were once offered. But I mean, I appreciate the conversation coming up, but I still think that at some point it's going to be in our best interest to have the road go all the way to Old Brownsville Road, but at whose expense is going to be the big question. So, thank you.
Ms. Barlow?
Quick question. So is the current, or will the road be reconstructed in concrete?
It hasn't been designed yet. It wasn't one of the 60%. Once we design it, it will probably one where it'll be considered due to the fact that it's an industrial area.
Right. So it will be considered, so that'll come back here? Or
when we bring it for award, we will. If council wants updates, we'll be bringing updates back. This project is not one of the ones in the preliminary ones. All we have is a feasibility report. We can share with you what has been looked at as far as the area and what the preliminary, how they came up with the preliminary costs.
Okay. Well, I think that's important, that that is absolutely a part of the discussion moving on, that this is concrete or considered to be.
Industrial area.
Right,
Yes.
right. Okay, thank you.
Ms. Opal?
And now that we brought up Type B, would this roadway qualify to be constructed using Type B funds?
Either category.
In either category, I mean, the street as it is now,
Economic development.
it's economic development, and, I mean, would it be possible that we could look at this going through a Type B process instead of being on a 20-year bond?
This is almost certainly one that would qualify. There's primary jobs being created by the businesses that are on this location, it looks like.
So when I look at this as a possibility, and again, we don't want to overtax the Type B funds. I understand that it's not a be-all, end-all to everything that we have. But when you look at a project that is somewhat specifically crafted, was probably in the minds of the folks who generated this, Junior Beck would be kind of that street. And by taking, you know, 1.4 million out of Prop B and integrating it into the work plan, and I know we're still developing that work plan for the Type B funds, but it just seems like, and then given what Ms. Fajardo has brought up, that maybe there's a more comprehensive review of that street that would be appropriate. Just removing that from this group, from Proposition B, and saying, hey, that's what the voters and the framers of the Type B legislation said. This is a great street for that. So I would make a motion that we take Junior Beck out of hold on. He said, hold on.
To consider?
Just to.
Well, make your motion.
Let me make the motion. He said, hold on.
Explain that.
So what the motion that I would like to make is to take Junior Beck from Proposition B and put it, direct it to go through the Type B funds, and incorporate Ms. Fajardo's consideration of how we could make that a bare lane to Old Brownsville Road Street, as opposed to just reconstructing the street that's there, using Type B resources.
Is there a second to the motion?
Well, look, this street is under, let's finance it for 20 years. It's under a Proposition B. This street qualifies clearly for Type B funding to reconstruct that street. So rather than asking our taxpayers to pay twice in some ways, we'll take it out of here and then we'll assign it to the, work it through a Type B process, because it is a commercial street that qualifies under that. And then, as Ms. Fajardo said, this street truly needs to be a bare lane to Old Brownsville Street, and working through the EDC to create a project that would either include the Ortizes, because at the time, the unfortunate part is the Ortizes had a performance bond. They were going to do this at no cost to the city. So if we could put that back on the table with them by offering an end-to-end street, I think that would be beneficial to the taxpayers and to the folks who have to use that on a day-to-day basis.
Mr. Chen?
Well, if we're doing a street that's no cost to the city, I'm having trouble understanding. No cost to the city, why do we need to appropriate money?
The part that's the part that's ours, the 1.4 million, that would come out of Type B funds and not a bond fund. Much the same as. But
we've already allocated out of Type B.
Huh? No, not Junior Beck.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so where are we with Type B right now?
Let's I've been looking for the
Type B.
I didn't get a second on that motion, but we'll talk this thing through a little bit. Based on the previous action of the City Council, we're already queued up to go to Type B with the other 3 projects that were pulled out of Prop A. Those are Everhart, Holly, and Slough. Those now have to go to Type B. By virtue of pulling those out and saying that the Type B will fund those roadways, we now need to channel those roadways through Type B and then bring them back to City Council for funding.
I apologize. I was not talking about the type B allocated for residential streets.
No, I know you were not.
I was talking about the type B that's allocated for economic development.
That's exactly what I'm talking about too. Because Slough, Holly, and Everhart, they were pulled out of Prop B, and the direction of City Council was to fund those with a spend as you go on with the revenues generated over the next 3 years with the type B. So now those projects go to type B for discourse. This would be, so the monies for arterials and collectors over the next 3 years has been tied up by virtue of that.
Okay, so
now this is a project, what I'm hearing now, it's still another street project, but keep in mind that 50% of the revenues from your type B are permissible for economic development projects. So what we're talking about potentially here is pulling out of that 50% on the economic development side of the slate as opposed to the arterials and collectors side of the slate. No. However,
go ahead.
That's okay. I'll do my however later. Well, but regardless, now we would be looking at taking all 4 streets to the type B. They need to go to type B now by virtue of pulling them out of here and saying we're going to use that type B money for spend as you go. Now they need to approve these 3 projects at the type B.
So I'm confused. I thought the policy was that the type B funds were going to be appropriated to the city and for that arterials and collector streets. I thought they were going to just appropriate that money to the city, and the city would then determine, the city staff, not, I mean, type B is a city.
The resolution that they passed was, and you as a council have not received it yet, but the resolution that they passed specifically called out paying for debt.
So we just need to go back and refresh, because I think the intent of the council was that they were going to, they were not going to get in the business of picking streets. I still have a concern about a committee of the council picking the streets. I thought was going to be that it was going to be an annual appropriation, much the same as it is to housing and community development for affordable housing, that then the city staff would administer that based on our program. I guess I just misunderstood that.
Councilmember, they passed that resolution that way shortly after we had presented them with the first option. When we changed the option with council, we now have to go back to them and correct that the money is now going to be used to fund those 3 streets.
So perhaps that's a different conversation, but I thought that the general feeling was that type B would not pick the streets, that type B would annually appropriate the money to the city of Corpus Christi's budget, and that budget would then dictate how that portion, now the portion I'm talking about, Junior Beck, that's entirely different. Because that goes through a different process, it has a whole different feel. But the 3 projects, based on what I understood the type B had approved, I didn't realize it was just for debt, would be appropriated back into the city's budget, much the same as we do for other activities such as affordable housing. And so for this particular for this particular project, it just seems like the economic benefit of doing the whole project, however we can make that work, would far surpass redoing a street that in, as Mr. Garza pointed out, a very short period of time, is going to be back in the same condition simply because of the size and weight of the vehicles that have to make that cul-de-sac turn and shoot back out. So that's really why, and I was doing it from that other bucket, not the bucket that
right. So, if I may, let me turn my light on for you.
You may.
Thank you. Just to be clear, so you're saying take it out, the 1.4, we pull it out of the bond, we pay for this, we don't finance it with interest for the next 20 years, pay for it through economic development growth bucket, yep. And then we use this towards extending and completing that road.
Or as Mr. Garza says, we go back and we work with the developer to see what we could do to make, but yes, absolutely.
Okay, I'll second that.
All right, Mr. Garza.
Ms. Opal, I'm so sorry. So the way you stated the motion included, my understanding was that it was to remove it completely. Now it is doing both, where we're going to keep it in the bond? No, it's still remove it. Okay.
What the motion would be, for the purposes of this discussion, the motion would be to remove Junior Beck from Proposition B.
Okay.
The intent of the motion as Ms. Guajardo pointed out, is that this would then move into an economic development track that would include looking at that uncompleted portion of Junior Beck to connect Bear Lane and Old Brownsville Road, thereby enhancing the economic viability of the adjacent property.
Okay, hearing no second, the motion dies.
No, I
Oh, you did second it? Oh.
Well, I mean,
there was so much talking, I didn't hear the second. I'm sorry.
Your ears are a little plugged up.
There's a disadvantage of not having a button. I don't get to press, but the good news is I get the last say. That's the.
well,
Yeah.
and I would like to know does everybody understand, right? I just want to make sure, because if we need to have discussion, I would like to hear everybody's thoughts. This is, to me, this is very, to everybody, it's important, but the industry will come. It is not coming and won't, because it's a dead street. And it is not only going to serve industry coming and setting up. You're talking about, right now, it's a one-way in, one-way out. Speaking of that, public safety, that could be a fiasco. You can only get in one way and get back out the other.
Be careful. There's more than one way to get in.
Is there?
Yes.
Which way is that?
Well, you got Corporate Street and you got Bear Lane. There's two ways to get in and out of that subdivision.
Greg, fact check. Corporate? There's one way. Right.
No, there's not. Here's Padre Island Drive. You come in over here on Junior Beck Drive. You go down Padre Island Drive. You can get in there on Corporate Boulevard or Corporate Drive. I've been in one way and out the other.
Right, but from Corporate to Junior Beck, there is one way.
No, you turn right or left. You don't ask the police that you turn right or left on Junior Beck from Corporate.
I'm looking for.
And you can turn right on Junior Beck and go from Padre Island Drive down Corporate Drive,
let's
turn right on
rephrase
Junior
that.
Beck. Wait a minute. And when you get to right on Junior Beck, when you come to the stop sign, you'll either turn right or left on Bear Lane. And you can come in and out either one. So you've got an entry off of Bear Lane and an entry off of Padre Island Drive. If you want to go down to Andrews, you turn to the left. If you want to go down to whatever that is on the, I can't see the title, Ferguson Plumbing and that sort of thing.
But if you work for Owen Oil or Bluebell or McTurbin or Cintas or
I'm just saying,
Allegiance,
be careful.
No, I take that statement back. You're right, there is. But if you work from Ferguson to the left or Andrews to the left, you are in one way and out one way, period. And the only things to the right, to your point, are if you're the lucky employees of, I don't know what that is, Evans Glass, behind Evans Glass, and whatever this is over here, Bodine Scott, or whatever that is. So the 90% of people that work on that street can come in and out one way.
No.
Yes,
if I work at Bluebell Ice Cream, I can come down Padre Island Drive,
and
I can turn on Corporate Drive and turn left, and then turn left and go down to Bluebell and eat all the ice cream I want all day long. And when I get ready to go home, I can come out of there and I can turn left and go down to Junior Beck Drive all the way down to Bear Lane, and I can turn left to go home if I want to go the back way, or I can turn right to go home by Padre Island Drive. Right. There's more than one way in and out to Junior Beck.
There is, but there's only one way out if you work. Okay, well, I'm going to let it go. You won. But if you're back here, no, you're not getting out the other way because there's no road. So my point is this. We had an amazing, as Mrs. Opal said, opportunity. Didn't work out, whatever reason. It is what it is. We were going to, it was a very generous offer and it didn't go through. This will be developed. Clearly what you saw, these plans, these are back from 20-something years ago. That was the plan. There was a reason for that because industry wants land there. They want to come, but.
All right, Mr. Smith.
Thank you. We're right at the final hour, I think, on this, so I'm a little bit concerned there. All of this is new to me. I don't have the history. I know we do have a new industrial park going in right now off of Bates and SPID, isn't there? They're laying utilities. I drove by there yesterday. That we do have room on Navigation. We have room on Flato Road. for this. I know Flato is in need of repair, so being talked about this where you all have a lot of history, which I don't have, where we're talking about industrial demand. I don't know what our current market is on that. I would hate to make a decision at this point in time with just a few minutes of information on something like this. And I'm confused on the fact I thought with the Type B board that we authorized funding for those streets on a cash basis and not, I'm hearing that we're going to be borrowing the money?
Let me just, I would like to make one.
No, hold on. Let Mr. Selman clarify that, because that is confusing, and I think we need to have that cleared up now.
Thank you, Mayor. In order to expedite those projects, we're going to come forward with a resolution to take the CIP funds and borrow against the CIP funds to expedite those, because those revenues come, it's sales tax revenue, and it comes in throughout the year. But if we think we'll have enough by the time we get to the point of awarding on the projects, but in order to ensure that we have enough to go out to bid on the projects, we'll need to bring forward that resolution.
Okay, so it's an interim financing, it's not
Correct.
long-term financing.
Correct.
And it's a backstop financing.
Correct.
On there, so.
Correct.
The original intent of us paying.
You turn your microphone on, please.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, so the original intent, pay as you go, you're just having a backstop to that. That is the plan, but by doing this, in case the revenues don't come in as far as the projects go. Correct. So the intent is still there, pay as you go.
Correct.
Thank you.
All right, so let me be real clear. Restate the motion, Ms. Artworth.
Ms. Opel, why don't you restate it?
Let me just make one point, Mr. Smith. What you just requested really does not relate to this motion. Those 3 streets come from a separate funding component of the Type B funds that were designated for arterial and collector streets. So that does not affect this motion. What this motion would do, the way that Type B works, or should work, the way Type A worked, is that it is not financed. It is paid for existing, usually, I'm not sure right now what the numbers, I don't have them at my fingertips, but Type A has at least somewhere north of $3 million sitting in the bank, accumulating some small amount of interest. And so there is money in those funds. So when a project comes forward to be constructed, we write the checks out of those funds. And this is the portion, the jobs development, the economic development part of Type B is the funding that I am recommending for this particular project to be investigated, to be reviewed, to be funded, because that is, I mean, you couldn't craft a better Type B project for economic development than to allow Bluebell and Anheuser-Busch to go down to Old Brownsville Road and turn right to get to Alice or to get to the other locations that they serve. So that's where when you, Brownsville Bear, one or the other, that's where you look at this and say this is an economic development project. So no, this would not be financed. It would be paid for using the funds that normally accumulate, and we as a city have to make smart choices about how to keep the city moving forward using economic development funds. There was a period of time with Type A when the city just accumulated a lot of money and it really wasn't doing the kinds of work. This would go to doing the work that we need to do. So the motion is, for the purposes of this discussion, to remove Junior Beck Drive from Proposition B with the intent that Junior Beck would be completed utilizing the economic development portion of the Type B funds, and would be negotiated or worked through or approached with the developer of the adjacent property to ensure that that street would be completed between the two. And I do want to say this happened the last time Junior Beck came forward, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Garza, that the District 3 representative at the time was not at the table because she was ill and unable to be there. And I have to note that today, Ms. Rubio is not here because she wanted to be here, but she's just not quite there yet. And so every time we talk about Junior Beck and completing Junior Beck and moving it forward, circumstances have placed our type 3 representative not in the room. And I would guarantee you that if that chair were filled at the end of this dais, that Ms. Rubio would be saying, this is important not just for this street, but for the whole development of District 3. So I just feel very strongly about it. I think that this will be completed. It will be completed not using debt if history repeats itself. And it may even get more than what we can offer right now because of what Ms. Gray said, that we're not in the business of building speculative streets, if you will, using city funds. But type B funds, type A funds, those are the kind of funds where we go in and say, you know what, this is for the future economic development of our city. So that's my motion. I hope that cleared it up.
Just a moment. We'll see if there's some clarification for public comment. Yes, sir. Did you have your, Mr. Garza?
There's not a larger champion for streets than you got sitting right here in this chair. The big thing is that I think that we should leave it on the bond, and I think we should still work on getting type A funds to do it the way we want to do it. But I don't like taking the risk of it not passing whatever it is, the economic data or analysis that it takes in order to be able to utilize those funds to do that project. The analysis that they did, say for instance 5 years ago when we first talked about it, may come out different than they come out today. Just because, again, the market changes, the amount of people actually offering industrial sites might be different. I'm for doing it using type A, type B funds, but I think we should leave it on the bond so that we assure the folks out there that if for some reason it doesn't get through the type A and the economic development analysis that we can get that street done. That's just my feeling. I'm going to vote against this motion. Thank you.
Mr. Risley?
The assumption has been made. Well, first the question was asked, is it eligible for type B funds? Yeah, it's eligible, and it's the second, but the assumption that's been made is it drops into the economic development side. It's clearly eligible for type B funds, and if council decides it should drop into the economic development side, that's certainly what we would support. But we haven't issued an opinion yet that supports that it can drop into the economic development side, because keep in mind a specific percentage was established for that. So I don't want to commit to being able to drop into the economic development patch of funds. It's clearly an arterial or collector street, but our opinion at this time is that it's eligible. Whether it's eligible as economic development is a question that was not asked, and so that's open. The other assumption that's been made is that the streets do not need to be approved by type A. Well, the projects need to be approved by type A, type B. A type B corporation approves the projects, and that's what makes them eligible. You can't make essentially they have veto power, so don't just assume that type B would have an obligation to take what you state. So type B has to approve a project in order to expend the funds on the project with type B funds.
Mr. Roy.
I just want to state that I agree with Councilman Garza. The part of it is that we're saying in the beginning that we want to do this because of the fact that progress has been hindered based on the fact that this road doesn't connect. I think that we need some additional information before we can actually make a decision on this, and the fact that there are other ways to be able to leave the industrial park, and taking in consideration that if you look at the amount of open land there now, especially between Allegiance and Andrews, that that if somebody really wanted to move in, I'm really having a hard time understanding that that's hindering their decision. And for that reason, I think we need to look at this a little bit further.
All right. A couple of questions. Ms. Guajardo?
I'm going to encourage everyone to take a drive out there. And not only that, but to speak to the people and the businesses out there and get their thoughts. Because what they set up there definitely benefits them, but it benefits us in the long run. So I do respect and understand your points, but again, and this obviously has come up today, but it is something I'm asking you guys to put as a priority, and I think I speak for Mrs. Rebo, clearly Mrs. Opal, because this has been lingering and lingering and lingering, and it is, we know what happens when things just linger. Nothing. Thank you.
Okay. I don't have a button, but and Ms. Guajardo's button is off. Two things. One, this is a city council meeting, and there is public comment.
Correct, on the item.
Okay, so I'll get to you in just a minute, Ray, if you'll hold on. Couple things for clarification. And I'm not a lawyer, so I don't mean to be arguing with you, but, Mr. Risley, but as I understand it, type B money, there's 3 buckets. You got economic development, you got affordable housing, and you got road, collectors and arterial streets. 3 projects that were removed from the bond proposal, and those 3 streets Mr. Selman read were Everhart and what are the other 2 of?
Slough and Holly.
All right. Those 3 streets are going to be paid for by the residential, the collector and arterial of type B, right?
Correct.
All right. The newly constructed part that's being proposed, and I think is what Mrs. Guajardo was suggesting, and also Ms. Opal, would be paid by the economic development portion of type B that is uncommitted at this time, to my knowledge. In our attorney's mind, there may be some question whether it's economic development or not. I'm not an attorney, but I don't see how you could not argue that building a road between vacant piece of property that's in an industrial district that would allow development wouldn't be economic development. So, I understand legal things. Sometimes you swallow camels and gag on gnats, but I don't think we'd have a problem qualifying under bucket economic development for that portion of the street. And I wholeheartedly support that piece of the street needs to be done. But I also know that they have been asking for and wanting the existing portion of Junior Beck Street to be one that's drivable and livable. And the owners of the different pieces of property out there have gone in, I think more than one time, and redone that street because it's just such bad condition because whoever it was didn't do something. My question is this, and when we talk about, I don't know why the property owner or the developer wouldn't do it. The question is, this industrial development project is a little different animal than any other we've had in that in the original creation of this, it was set up as a nonprofit economic development corporation, as I understand it and remember it. It was the, whatever it is, industrial park. I forget what they had, a fancy name for it. CorpusChristi Industrial Park, but I thought they had something fancier than that, but that's pretty creative. But it was a nonprofit. I don't know, does that nonprofit still exist as the owners of all of this property? Has it been disbanded? Were there certain rules back in those days that put the burden of the curb, gutter, and sidewalk and all of that on that nonprofit? Or did they still have to abide by the same rules of development that, or waive the requirement since it was a nonprofit and the purpose was set up by the economic development to stimulate economic development? Were there any concessions provided to that nonprofit that helped them try to expedite the development of this park that stayed with the property if it's gone out of existence?
I'm going to answer one part of that question and let Miles answer another part of that question.
That's the problem of being here a long time. You remember some of these things.
Yes, sir. The roadway is dedicated public roadway. Otherwise, we wouldn't have it on for bond. So it's dedicated by plat.
Okay.
So,
but as Mr. Garza stated and you have stated that when a development goes in, it's the developer's responsibility to put in the curb, gutters, and streets, and once the city accepts them, then it becomes theirs. In the enthusiasm and in the excitement of the Economic Development Corporation group that put this together to create the nonprofit, was there some type of any partnership agreement that said the city would put in this sort of stuff and they would go out and market it and try to bring to, I think Andrews Distributing was the first investor out there in terms of a building. I may be wrong, but I think he was the first one. But, so that's what I'm saying, is there any special requirements or waivers of requirements? Because this was kind of a creative, out-of-the-box thinking deal back when it was created. That's not being critical. That's just saying they were forward-thinking enough that they wanted it to be a high-end industrial development. I mean, it's right there on Padre Island Drive. They've got, and everything out there, it's a little higher grade than what you normally find in existing industrial development situations. So when we look at it and we have our normal response to industrial parks, has anybody really looked into the weeds to find out is there or is there not any different treatment because of this creation and the history of it?
That's a research project, and we can certainly look into that issue. I don't know of any special arrangement like you're just mentioning, but I'm not going to say there's not one because...
Yeah, and I don't, that industrial park doesn't, as a nonprofit, doesn't exist anymore. I think that's all individually owned parcels of property right now, right?
Mr. Ortiz bought
The Ortiz family bought the corporation as it was, or undeveloped land? Okay. But anyway, so we've got 3 buckets of type B money. The collectors and arterials are the 3 projects that we're talking about. The new portion of Junior Beck is it. Now the motion, I'm assuming, that is on the table is that this would be a reduction in the bond issue by $1.4 million.
Reduce our debt.
that's the way I understand it as well, Mayor.
Okay. So, all right, well, let's have any other public comment. Mr. Madrigal, you wanted to speak?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Come on up. Introduce yourself to the public so they know who you are. Well, make sure you introduce yourself to the public so they know who you are. Want them to recognize your name.
We want to make sure that we get the name right,
yeah,
sir.
That's going to be important in the next 60 days. They want you to.
Good thing I read the Color Times, and this morning I saw that you were having this special meeting, right? Special meeting?
Special council meeting, yes, sir.
Special council meeting. And I said, well, let's find out what it's all about. And the gentleman here was kind enough to give me a copy of the what's going on. And I look at the streets, and I count the streets, 24 in A and 14 on B. And I said, well, I don't know the difference between, not that I don't know the difference between A and B, but which, are they both going to go on? Because I didn't recognize too many streets on the west side of town. I recognized 2 on A, which is, let me see here, Crosstown Expressway to Greenwood, fine. And then the other, well, that was on A. The other one was on B, which kind of worried me. Not worried me, but I thought, well, Castanon Street, it's way out of the way of anybody. You have to be looking for Castanon Street. It's like less than a quarter mile or more. And I said, well, okay, I have no problem with that. But my problem is this. 2 out of 37 streets in the west side. That's where I come in and I say, wait a minute, I think we have a lot of streets on the west side of town that need some type of improvement. And, but I don't know who came up with the list, but maybe they're not familiar with the west side of town. The other one was this Museum of Science and History. I recently read in the Color Times, my source of information, that they just remodeled and improved that building and that facility after the hurricane. And I understand they're changing management of that facility. So if they just improved it, so why are the citizens having to pay? Let me see, where is it? I lost this sign. Well, why are the citizens having to pay a new fee? It looks like $820,000 when they just remodeled it, and they just opened it a few, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. They just opened it as a new building for the citizens to enjoy. That seems like a lot of money, $820,000 for a building that they just renovated. I don't know.
All right, thank you.
Oh, the last, one last second.
All right, your time is up. We allow 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
You bet. Any other public comment? Any other public comment? The only comment I would make is that there are a lot of streets all over town that aren't on this list. We just have a huge problem, and you got to start eating the elephant one bite at a time, and this is our first bite. So that's doesn't matter where your street is. If it needs fixing, it's on the list. It's just not on this one, but they're going to all be addressed ultimately. All right, that's the motion that you're wanting to.
Take Junior back off.
Well, you be sure to call Ms. Rubio and tell her you're taking it off the bond issue, because that.
I follow with you.
Mayor, one more comment.
All right, one more comment, then we're going. Let's go.
Mayor, I drive over there at least once a week for the last 15 years. I go to Ferguson Enterprises. I buy a bunch of plumbing supplies there. So I'm real familiar with that street. So it's not like I need to go over there and look at it again. And I just fear that if we take the 1.4 off of the bond project, and for some reason it doesn't fit, or it's not allowed, or doesn't pass the Type A board, or there's other projects that might be more lucrative or more urgent at this particular time, they're going to be left with nothing. And that's the reason why I'm going to vote against this particular deal. If we pass this and we go to the voters, and if they vote no, we don't get it anyway, right? But if they vote yes, we still have the opportunity to go and look for a way to be able to fund the whole thing from one end to the other through the Type A or Type B board, and not have to actually float that debt and do it through a bond project. But if we vote no, and then for some reason it hits a stumbling block through the EDC or through the Type B board, those poor folks over there don't have anything. And so that's why I'm going to vote against the motion.
All right, Mr. Hunter.
Thank you, Mayor. I just got a quick question for Valerie. When we were deciding these streets, we had a pretty equal breakdown per district, anywhere between 18 to 24%. Mr. Madrigal's comments did concern me, and I do see 5 here that may not necessarily be on the westmost portion of the city, but they are considered District 3. Is that still a fair statement? Okay. I just wanted to clarify that. Yes. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Opal.
Let's call for the question, Mayor.
All right, all in favor of the motion?
Would you please do a
call
roll
the roll.
Okay, so for passage of the motion to amend, Mayor McComb?
No.
Council members Garza?
No.
Guajardo?
Yes.
Hunter?
No.
Lindsay Opal?
Yes.
Molina?
No.
Roy?
No.
Rubio is absent. Smith?
No.
The motion fails.
Okay, so the bond issue is still as presented. Is that correct?
Well, as amended. Because one amendment did pass. The amendment to fix the piers.
Okay.
You still need a motion to accept
Yes.
the bond proposal as just
So
with the
I
one
have a couple
amendment.
more questions before we do.
Okay. That
Yeah, we
first,
do need a motion to approve as amended.
all right, clarification, because it's been a while since the discussion, and the motion to fix the piers was that we, tell me what the motion.
Well, the motion was-
Tell me
So-
about that again.
So we made a
I think I
motion to.
remember right, but I want to make sure.
We made a motion to amend, and it was regarding Proposition C. So we were going to reallocate the money for the splash pads and the shade structures. And yeah, we're going to use the 1.2 for that instead of to repair and reconstruct Cole Park Pier and Demet Pier.
Okay, and that is using the park fund money for the splash pad thing, which
Right.
is
The community enrichment funds.
community enrichment and the, okay,
Yes, sir.
and that
So
passed.
that amendment did pass, sir.
That money stayed in the bond program?
Yes, sir. It's just
Okay, all right.
reallocated.
Any other changes on that?
No.
So that's what's before us now is that approval,
So what's before us now is the whole bond, the ordinance calling for the election.
as amended.
As amended, including that change.
But we've called for the, we've called for the vote. You want to withdraw it? Or call,
No, no,
you've
no,
ca- you
I-
made a
I
motion
call-
to call for the question.
I called for the question on the motion that we just voted on. That was just to get this Prop B thing done.
Okay, so
I-
what do we got now?
So I have a couple, if I may.
Sure.
I have a question when we look at where it says utility rate increase, and we talk about this being for residential households. I know that here in Corpus Christi, we are seeing a proliferation of multifamily. We were at the Cosmopolitan last night, beautiful facility. You know, you look at apartments. I want some clarification on how that multifamily is impacted as well, because I know that it is, but if I'm a residential homeowner and when we go out and we speak to them and we say, and it's going to be $2 on your residential utility bill or 82 cents on your utility bill, that's not just, I mean, it filters in a different way, but I think that this cost is spread all over the city. Is that true or not true? Because we talk about residential, your residential utility bill, but if you're multifamily, someone is paying that as well. And I just want to be very clear that it's showing up on a bill even if you're a multifamily, correct? I mean, it's not like people aren't raising rates on apartment houses.
And let me ask to expand that a little closer. It's not only showing up on your, as I understand it, at least when I look at my bills, it's not only your residential bill, but it's your industrial and your commercial and my business bill. So we just need to say $2, or is it going to be more on businesses as opposed to the $2 and something?
Mark Van Vleck, Assistant City Manager. To clarify, one is it is all residential and commercial, and multifamily kind of goes both ways depending on how it was handled. As far as industrial, many of them, unless the project includes a large transmission main, it wouldn't affect their rates, because most of these are smaller, so it mainly affects commercial and residential and multifamily type rates rather than large industrial, because of the volume of the water and what they're connected to. But otherwise, it's everyone that it affects their rates.
Well, I think if we're going to have promotional material, I think she hit a good thing in terms of disclosure and transparency. I hate that word, transparency. Yeah. But anyway, that it's a $2 increase on your utility bill. If you turn on your tap, like I do and some of the others of us do, we turn it on more at one location, I'm going to have $2 at my house and $2 at my business.
Not necessarily. The calculation is on the average usage of a residential home. We didn't do a calculation as far as commercial usage. Okay, it could be a completely different amount, but the key is it affects all rates.
All right. Well, let me chase a rabbit. And this is probably not the proper time to do it, but I'm going to do it. Therein lies the frustration with the public on our current utility bill issues. Going back, the frustration we're at, besides the fact that we've got a disastrous computer that can't handle the problem, the discussion of utility rates when we were through the budget last year and when we adopted the rates last year, and the presentation was that the net effect really, except for 3 or 4% of the population, is going to be a net zero effect. And then we find out that's not right. And our experience has been, and those rates are based on a 2-year cycle, so we're not considering rates in this budget cycle. But I think what we need to make real clear to the public is that there's going to be a complete review of the rate structure and find out what went wrong, and that we can assure them that budget period next year there is going to be some adjustment to the rate that's going to be more accurate to reflect what we're trying to accomplish. Now, that may just be my personal, but I believe this whole council sat there last year in the budget hearings and came away from that basically said it's going to be a net impact on 95% of the customers, with a few big water users are going to have some adjustment. And I mean, that's just not coming to pass. So this is what kind of concerns me, is that, okay, well, and we're using the same screwed up computer that we used last year to do these projections. You know, we're going out and saying, okay, it's $2 on the utility bill, and then all of a sudden I go to my little moving company. I mean, we've got a big building, you know, we've got 2 restrooms, we don't have anything else that uses water except if an engine gets hot, we get some in the radiator, and all of a sudden my water bill goes up, you know, and I use very little water in my business, but it doesn't go up $2, it goes up $40 or $20 or whatever it finally comes out. So I think we need to know the numbers, and I don't have a problem with trying to address this, but I think we just need to be very careful and don't get ourselves in a box to have to spend the next 12 months apologizing for making a mistake. And that's not being critical, that's just, I mean, we're dealing with it. Every one of us get these calls and multiple calls and emails and texts from people that they're having a hard time swallowing what we bought last year at the presentation. So, Ms. Opal.
So on that utility rate increase per month, on this, whatever communication we're putting out there, we need to say what that's based on. So either it needs an asterisk or some way that we can articulate that this is the sample that we used, however the impact is going to be spread across all users of the system at some level. And I think that's an important piece. And along that line, just because this is kind of what I do, I really like the fact that the propositions on page 4 are numbered, but I think those numbers need to translate over to the proposition pages such that Leopard Street is project number 1, and when I turn to page 7, number 1 is Leopard Street. So that as I can correlate what's on, I hate to hold it up like in class, but what's on this page where it says number 1, when you get to this page, you go look at number 1 under proposition A, because it's just listed. There's just a list of streets. And if I wanted to correlate those, 1, 2, 3, 4 needs to correlate with page 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's just if someone were in the audience wanting to ask a question, they said, I want to talk about item 10 under proposition A, that's Galahar Road, or I don't even know if that's 10. It's just a communication piece. You have them listed numerically here, and those numbers don't tie to anything else in the document.
The order does, but the numbers don't.
The numbers do not.
You're
So
just
just
saying
make that
move
number.
Yep.
You know, one
Understood.
is 1, 2 is 2, 3 is 3,
Right.
all throughout the document, so that you'd be able to track it.
Ms. Debbie Lindsay Opal, it might be better to take the numbers off. Instead of putting the numbers, I think it becomes kind of confusing because the numbers start over in each proposition. And so
proposition A1, proposition B1, proposition C1. I mean, people, the reason that I like the numbers is when I'm looking in here, if I want to talk to you about the North Beach primary access, and it doesn't have a number, and I don't know where it ties to. I just feel like they need to be clarified for people who are going to call and ask about that, so that you can say, is that Proposition X? If we're going to, I like the numbers, but I think the numbers need to tie so we can talk about Proposition A1, Proposition B1.
And are you talking about the summary page to have a page number behind it?
No. It just,
as well?
No, it's just these numbers are here.
Okay.
And so this would be A1. That would be the only, A1A, A1. And so when I get over here, it says Proposition A1, A2, A3, A4.
Okay.
And so someone who calls and says, I want to talk about Galahar Road, instead of having to go, where's Galahar? Let me find it. They would say, I want to talk about Proposition A10, right. And then everybody would know what you're talking about.
Right. I think the only reason we had done that is because on the ballot, they're not numbered. They're just listed. So it was just a way to show the total number of projects. So I hear you.
Understood, but okay. Somehow we got, again, we want to communicate effectively so people know what we're doing and they don't come back 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now and say, what was that council thinking? And we want them to know what we were thinking. Thank you.
You're going to say that anyway.
It's a worth a shot.
All right, I don't see any more lights lit up. Mr. Selman, anything else on the bond proposal? Are you ready for a vote on the authorizing it?
We're ready for action.
Move to approve as amended.
All right, the motion on the floor is to move the proposition for a 2018 bond proposal forward. Is there any other discussion?
There's no second.
Is there a second?
There we go.
Second, Mr. Smith. Any other discussion, public or council? Hearing none, Ms. Huerta, would you call the roll?
So for passage of ordinance number 1 on its first reading as amended, Mayor McComb?
Aye.
Council members Garza?
Aye.
Guajardo?
Aye.
Hunter?
Aye.
Lindsay Opal?
Aye.
Molina?
Aye.
Roy?
Aye.
Rubio is absent. Smith?
Aye.
The ordinance passes.
Is there any other business? There's nothing else listed on the agenda except for that ordering of a special election for bond 2018. Any other business before it comes to council? If not, next regularly scheduled council meeting is Tuesday, August the 14th. Is that correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm. That's right, Mayor. August 14th.
All right. Well, with that, wish everybody a happy and safe weekend, and we are adjourned.
The Texas Parks and Wildlife television series is funded in part by a grant from the Wildlife and Sport Fish Restoration Program. Through your purchases of hunting and fishing equipment and motorboat fuels, over $50 million in conservation efforts are funded in Texas each year. Additional funding provided by Ram Trucks, Guts